Hello students, so today we are going to start with a new chapter, Attitude and Social Cognition. Both chapter 6 and 7 deals with the branch of social psychology. So before moving ahead with the chapter, let us understand what social psychology is about. You must have actually learned about social psychology in your class 11th, wherein you had done the fields of psychology. So social psychology is basically a branch of psychology which deals with the social behavior. It deals with the behavior of an individual in their social environment. It deals with how the behavior of an individual is influenced by the social environment and how, like, for instance, the presence of others influences our behavior. Like, I'll give you an example of it. An example of it is like, for example, many of us, we get a lot of fear when we have to perform in front of others. We tend to get anxious, we tend to sweat a lot when there is some performance that we have to give on stage. Now, that is what exactly social psychologists study. That this is what they study, that how the presence of others, how does the presence of the larger whole influences your behavior, what makes us anxious in front of people, how our performance either gets better or gets deteriorated in the presence of others. So that is what social psychology deals with, the behavior of individuals and how it is affected by the social environment and the presence of the social people around us. Very quickly, let's just understand two terms here before proceeding to the main part of the chapter: social cognition and schemas. So before getting into social cognition, let's just recall what cognition is about. I think in class 11th, or when you first start studying psychology, this is a term that you are very initially only familiarized with. Cognition is the process through which you get to know the world. Cognition is the process through which you construct your understanding of the world around you. And when I put the word social in it, that brings people, or let's say that it brings the information or the understanding of the world in terms of social world. So when I'm, let's say, interacting with my peers, at that point of time a social cognition is tapped. So social cognition is basically gathering an interpretation of information about the social world, or about the social, from the social perspective. Coming to schemas, again a very small term that you have to understand. Schemas are the mental structure. So schemas are basically the mental structure which helps you familiarize with the familiar information. Like, for example, they are very, very important as they guide our thinking, or they give us shortcuts to solve certain questions, or to solve or to arrive at the solution of some problem. So in that, they actually act as that mental concept of mental structure which guides our thinking. Those are schemas. Apart from that, so in this particular chapter, we are firstly going to explain social behavior, what exactly social behavior is, or let's say what all processes occur under social cognition. I've just talked about what social cognition is and what all different processes come under it. So there are three main processes, but as per your term 2 syllabus, you have to majorly focus on just the attitude. But otherwise, the three processes of social cognition are attitudes, impression formation, and attribution. Attitudes are basically your mindset, they are the way you think. Okay, so due to social influence, people form certain pattern of thinking, people form certain ideas, they form certain attitudes about something. So when I talk about attitude, I'm usually referring to your way of thinking regarding something. Let's say, for example, if I pick up politics, what's your idea about politics, what's your thinking like regard to politics? So that will talk about your attitude towards politics. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be neutral. So that is your attitude towards politics. Second process of social cognition is impression formation. So impression formation is basically, when we all meet, you must have actually heard this phrase, first impression is the last impression. So just remember impression formation from that only. So when we meet people, we form certain conclusions, or we form certain ideas about them. Okay, so we draw certain inferences about them. Those inferences are what is known as impression formation. Basically, when you try to make an inference about the qualities of somebody, that is what impression formation is. So which is why it is said that first impression is the last impression, because when we are meeting somebody for the first time, they usually have a very compelling effect on us. So which is why always try to portray your best. Doesn't mean that you are not going to portray your best in the future. But yeah, coming forward to attribution. So attribution is basically a process wherein I assign causes to something, to some behavior. Let's say, for example, I came into class today, and while teaching I was, let's say, very frustrated, or my mood was not good. So maybe my students are going to come up with this attribution that ma'am pakka ladki aayi hai. So that is what attribution is, when you assign causes to behaviors of somebody. That is what the process of attribution is like. And in our day-to-day life, we do a lot of impression formation, we do a lot of attribution, we have various attitudes formed on various attitude objects. Attitude object is basically the topic on which we are trying to understand your attitude. You are very frequently going to get this term in the chapter ahead. Apart from that, when we talk about social influence, how does your behavior gets influenced by the presence of people? So there are two types of such behaviors: social facilitation, inhibition, and pro-social behavior. Social facilitation and inhibition is basically, so when my behavior gets better due to the presence of larger whole, due to the presence of people, that is known as social facilitation. But on the other hand, if my behavior gets inhibited, or let's say if my behavior gets bad in the presence of the larger whole, that is known as social inhibition. So the decline in the performance in presence of others is social inhibition, and the improvement in the performance in the front of the larger whole, that is social facilitation. Like, some people are so good at stage, so their behavior gets even better, their performance gets even better with the presence of audience. That is social facilitation. Whereas some people, they get all sweaty, they are unable to say a word. So yes, due to the fear, there's a decline in the performance, and that happens in social inhibition. Apart from that, another type of observable behavior due to social influence is your pro-social behavior. This is more of a helping behavior, wherein you help people who are in the need or who are in distress. Okay, so this is more of a helping behavior. Like, for example, Mother Teresa. She's a very, very good example of pro-social behavior. Entire life she served for the people who are in need, who are in distress. So that is pro-social behavior. Or let's say when you are going on the road and you see some accident has taken place, and you get down of your vehicle to help the person, that is an example of pro-social behavior. So apart from these two social influences, now, like I told you that in detail, as per the new modifications done to the syllabus, you have to deal with the attitude part mainly. So let's just come down to the introduction part of the attitudes. I've already told you what attitudes are about. It is a state of mind. It is basically a set of views or thinking that you have with regard to something, that of course may come out in your behavioral tendencies as well. This attitude behavior relationship I will be touching upon a little later on, but right now I'm going to stick to the introductory part of the attitudes. Like, for example, let's discuss the ABC components of attitudes. So the ABC component of attitude basically talks about the three components that are present there in attitude. Like, A is the affective component. It's related to your emotions. Understand from the word affect. Okay, it's related to the emotional component of attitude. Second is your behavioral or cognitive aspect. This is your tendency to act. This is your action part, basically behavioral part. And the C is your cognitive aspect, or the cognitive component of attitude, which involves your thinking and thought process. So when I talk about attitudes, always remember attitudes are your way of thinking. They are not your behavior. You can't equate attitudes and behavior. Attitudes and behavior do have a relationship. A lot of our attitudes come about in our behavior, but then again, simply stating that attitude is how you behave, no, that's not going to be right. It's more of thinking that you have, that eventually gets manifested in your behaviors. Why are attitudes present? What's the significance of attitudes? Of course, when I know somebody's attitude regarding something, it's easier for me to deal with that person. It's easier for me to decide that how this person is going to act in a situation. So the understanding of attitude kinds of provides us with a blueprint of understanding people. So that is the purpose of attitude. Two more terms which are related to, or let's say sometimes wherein students get confused with regard to what is belief, what is value, what is attitude. So I'll just simplify this for you. The cognitive component of your attitudes, the C part, okay, the thinking part, that forms belief. So there are beliefs, and on these beliefs my attitude stands. Okay, so the cognitive part of my attitudes is what the beliefs are about. When these beliefs create some should aspect, when these beliefs have some should aspect, like for example, we should be honest, we should always, maintain hygiene, we should always maintain cleanliness, those are values. So values from chapter 1 also, you might remember, values are ideal mode of behavior. So values are basically the moral or ethical values that we are talking about. Again, they are part of your cognitive aspect only, but they are different from attitudes. Values are more about ideal mode of behavior. Okay. Moving on from beliefs and values, we have features of attitudes, a very, very important topic. And you can usually get all sorts of, questions on this. You can get a 2 marker, you can get a 4, 6, any marker question on this one. So it's very important. Features of attitude have been divided into 4 major categories here: valence, extremeness, simplicity or complexity, and centrality. Valence will basically dictate us the direction of our attitude. Like in the attitude system, where does my particular attitude goes, in which direction? Is it a positive attitude, is it a negative attitude? So that will be determined by valence of the attitude, the positivity or negativity. How extreme is this positivity, how extreme is this negativity, or whether it's a neutrality in the attitude, that will be determined in my extremeness. So let's say I can take a 1 to 5 point scale. Okay, 1 to 5 scale I can take, and 1 is a very extreme value and 5 is an extreme value. The 2 and 4 are the lesser extreme values, while the third is the neutral value. So that is what extremeness is. On the scale of, let's say, 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how extreme is my particular attitude, whether negative or positive? The extremity of it is determined in extremeness. Third is simplicity or complexity, like whether there are sub attitudes in my particular attitude or not, like how simple or complex an attitude is. Let's say, for example, if I talk about health. Now health is a very big topic. Health is a very, very big attitude. It's a complex attitude. You have physical health, mental health, spiritual health. You have sleep, diet, and a lot of different attributes, in the health part. You have a lot of different things. So which is why it becomes a complex attitude. Simply talking about, let's say, your diet, that's a relatively simple attitude, okay, as compared to the entire health attitude. So simpler attitudes are basically those attitudes which contain a very few attitudes, while complex attitudes are the ones which have a lot of attitudes in them. Okay. Last, centrality. Centrality basically means in my entire attitude system, where does that particular attitude lies? So for example, if let's say I am somebody who is very kind, I am somebody who is a very good person. Okay, so let's say goodness and kindness is something that I very, very strongly believe in. So this particular attitude will have a central place in my attitude system, and most of my behaviors will be regulated by this attitude. So that is what centrality is. Centrality is the role that a particular attitude has in the entire attitude system. So if an attitude has a central place in your attitude system, that is going to be a very, very strong attitude influencing the other behaviors of yours. Okay, whereas if an attitude is peripheral in nature, not having a central place, rather it's on the periphery or in the peripheral areas, of course the influence of that attitude on your behavior would be a little less, relatively less than the central attitude. Okay, so I hope all the 4 features of attitudes are clear to you. Like I told you, this question can come in a small marker. It can also come in the long markers as well. So do prepare for it accordingly. In the next video, in the next part 2, I will be discussing in detail about attitude formation. I will be discussing in detail about attitude change. So stay tuned and do watch out for the another video. Thank you.